All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into how a terrifying 1974 tragedy completely mutated into one of Hollywood's most notorious franchises. You know the movies, or you've at least heard the name, right? Amityville. But the true story? Well, it's a wild study in what actually happens when a grim, undeniable reality gets swallowed whole by the entertainment machine. So how exactly did a horrific family tragedy mutate into this hoax-filled franchise? To figure that out, we really have to separate the spectacular Hollywood stuff from the grounded, honestly tragic reality reported by the actual people involved. We're going to look at the undeniable facts, the documented falsehoods, and the very real human cost of turning a literal crime scene into a ghost story.
Okay, Part 1. The Real Tragedy and 28 Days in the House.
Looking at the timeline, the pacing of these events is just ridiculously fast. The whole thing kicks off in November 1974 with the brutal DeFeo murders. The house just sits empty until December 1975, which is when George and Kathy Lutz move in with their 3 kids. But get this, by January 1976, they've already fled. And then bam! Just over a year and a half later, Jay Anson's book is published, and it sparks this instant nationwide media firestorm. Now, before we even touch the idea of hauntings, we absolutely must ground ourselves in the very real, visceral tragedy of 112 Ocean Avenue. We're talking about a massive, 5,000-square-foot Dutch colonial in Amityville, New York, and it was right here that 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. used a .35 caliber rifle to murder 6 innocent members of his own family in their sleep: his parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. That is the true, unembellished horror that happened at this address. And that brings us to a crucial number, 28. That is the exact number of days the Lutz family actually lasted in the home. Just 28 days before they packed up, or actually, scratch that, didn't pack up, and completely fled, leaving literally all of their possessions behind. Whatever it was that happened in those 4 short weeks, it became the seed for the whole shebang that followed. Moving right along to Part 2, Fact, Fiction, and Hoaxes. You've got to hear this stunning admission from 1979. William Weber, who was the defense lawyer for the murderer Ronald DeFeo Jr., straight up admitted that he, author Jay Anson, and the Lutzes basically created this horror story over many bottles of wine. I mean, wow! Weber's original goal was actually just to use the haunting narrative to try and score a new trial for his client. It's wild! Let's look at one of the most chilling details from the Hollywood myth. You probably remember the discovery of these demonic, cloven hoofprints in the snow outside the house. Super creepy, right? Well, the real scene was quite a bit different. When researchers checked the hard meteorological evidence for Amityville during those 28 days, weather records proved there was absolutely zero snowfall. None. Just dry, bare ground. So much for the hoofprints. And if you watch the movies, you see local police repeatedly visiting the house with sirens blaring right in the middle of this terrifying 28-day siege. But in reality, it was completely quiet. Investigators went back and checked the official Suffolk County police logs, and the records explicitly show the Lutzes never actually called the police during their entire stay. Not even once.
Then there's the physical damage. The book talks about doors and hardware being extensively damaged, supposedly ripped apart by unseen demonic forces. Yet, when subsequent owners and investigators actually inspected the physical hardware in the house, surprise, surprise, the original locks, doorknobs, and hinges were found completely untouched, just pristine. And the list of unsubstantiated Hollywood claims goes on. Green slime oozing from the ceilings? Nope. Swarms of attacking insects in the dead of winter? Mrs. Lutz levitating above the bed? Demonic pigs with glowing red eyes? All pure padding. Researchers consistently point out that these claims were heavily influenced by the cultural obsession with demonic possession at the time, really capitalizing on the massive success of The Exorcist, which had just come out a couple years prior.
Let's shift gears to Part 3, A Child's Lived Reality. You have to remember Christopher Quaratino, who was just 7 years old when his family moved in. He confirms that yes, weird, unexplained things did happen, but Hollywood wildly convoluted the details just for cinematic effect. For example, he recalls a real, genuine moment where his bedroom windows strangely swung open, but in the media retelling, that scene mutates into the window glass completely shattering into pieces. As Christopher points out, when skeptics easily prove the glass never shattered, they end up debunking the movie, but they completely ignore the family's actual experiences. And he expresses some very real, poignant anger at the ongoing sequels, especially the 2005 remake. Christopher was deeply offended by how the real DeFeo murder victims, who were innocent children, were shamelessly exploited as Hollywood props, literally portrayed walking around with bullet holes in their heads. He compares it to taking a real modern tragedy like Kaylee Anthony and exploiting it just to make a $108 million box office hit. It's pretty sickening when you look at it that way.
Because this is exactly what happens when a family's trauma is turned into a cash cow. For Christopher, the Amityville Horror wasn't some fun, scary movie, it was his actual childhood. He dealt with relentless bullying, bouncing from school to school. He got into physical fights with peers who called his family hoaxers and liars. Ultimately, it caused his family dynamic to fracture, and he went so far as to legally change his name just to escape the heavy shadow of that Lutz legacy.
Yet, the Hollywood machine just keeps marching on. Over 30 movies have been made about this house and this story. 30. Let that sink in. It's a staggering reality. It creates this continuous cycle that dredges up the past, generates completely new fictional lore, and continuously exploits the real people involved almost entirely without their consent.
Finally, Part 4, The House Today.
You know, the subsequent owners of the home have had to go to some pretty extreme lengths just to find a little bit of peace. They had to physically alter those iconic quarter-round eye windows to look like normal squares. They successfully petitioned the town to have the address legally changed from 112 to 108 Ocean Avenue. The house is literally blurred out on Google Maps. I mean, think about how absurd it is that a homeowner has to resort to satellite censorship just to hide from the unrelenting attention of trespassers and TikTokers who still show up there every single day.
Being the world's most famous haunted house also creates a truly bizarre real estate market. The Cromartie family bought it super cheap, for $55,000 right after the Lutzes left. Decades later, prices fluctuated wildly. It peaked at nearly $1 million before plummeting down to $605,000 in 2017. And let me tell you, that is a remarkably sharp drop for a beautiful 5,000 square foot waterfront home in that neighborhood. It just goes to show that the dark history still heavily impacts its value.
And speaking of the Cromarties, they lived in the house for a full decade right after the Lutzes. Their verdict? They repeatedly went on the record to say they never experienced a single supernatural event. As former owner James Cromartie perfectly summed it up, the only real weird thing that ever happened was the endless, frustrating stream of tourists coming by because of the book and the movie. It's also really important to note that even the paranormal community was totally divided on this. Early on, self-styled ghost hunters like Stephen Kaplan were brought in to investigate. But when Kaplan told the Lutzes he would publicly expose any fraud he found, well, they had a massive falling out. Kaplan actually went on to write an entire book detailing the factual errors in exposing the whole haunting narrative as a complete conspiracy. So I want to leave you with this final thought for this explainer. When we look back at Amityville, we see a story where the horrifying truth of 6 actual murders was completely overshadowed by Hollywood's slime and glowing red eyes. It really challenges us to stop and consider, in our true crime and horror obsessions, are we more captivated by the ghosts of fiction, or are we just ignoring the real human cost and the trauma of the survivors to enjoy a good scare? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and remember, keep asking the hard questions.